Well, MEAI is 5-methoxy 2-aminoindane. And it's actually, to be completely honest, a fascinating molecule. So the aminoindane as a group of molecules are a bit like, the best way to describe them, I think, is stale MDMA that's lost its luster. So it feels sort of somewhat warm and fuzzy and safe and connecting. If MDMA is I love you, the aminoindanes are I like you. So it's a group of molecules that have been available and manufactured by underground chemists for many years now, and they've been kind of experimented with and talked about on the internet, and people appreciate them. They don't love them, and they aren't particularly popular, but they're of interest for those who are sort of psychonauts and like to do lots of different research chemicals and report on them. So the reports on that group of molecules are available, but the particular one, the 5-methoxy 2-aminoindane, MEAI, has this kind of bizarre anti-addictive quality. So let me describe the experience of taking MEAI. If you take one dose of MEAI, one dose being 80 milligrams, it feels like you've had one beer. If you take a second dose, it feels like you've had two beers. Now, that's the most I ever drink. So at that point, when I've had two beers, I feel relaxed, somewhat disinhibited. The stress of my life recedes. It's a comfortable state. If you take a third dose of MEI, it becomes like 50 milligrams of MDMA. So a normal dose of MDMA being 100 milligrams. So it's a low dose of MDMA, maybe 60, 65, something like that, at dose amount of MDMA. So at that point, you feel connected to people around you. You feel warm. There's a level of comfort and bonding that happens, and safety and relaxation that happens with the experience. It's not intense. It's not an experience that you go, wow, this is wonderful. It's a positive experience, but not that positive. Mm-hmm. If you take another dose, so if you take the fourth one, the abrupt transition is actually startling. I'm not quite sure what the right word to describe it is, but it's certainly strange. The best way to describe what happens next is you've just finished eating 2 pieces of chocolate-covered goopy cheesecake, and somebody puts a third piece of cheesecake in front of you and hands you a fork. You look at the cheesecake. You can't imagine touching the cheesecake. Now, why can't you imagine? It's not because you're so stimulated you're hanging off the ceiling. It's not you're so sedated you're lying on the floor. It's not because you're so violently ill you're kneeling in front of the toilet. You're just simply done. You're finished. You're satiated. You are absolutely and completely sick of cheesecake. You can't imagine touching it anymore. So MEI triggers a satiation response. So the first round of anecdotal evidence that came with MEI was the inventor of the molecule found a group of Russian alcoholics, and they got together regularly with 26 ounces of vodka, and they would hang out with each other for the evening and drink their 26 ounces. And he said to them, can I add something to this experience? And they all said yes. And they all stopped drinking. In fact, I used to work in the addiction services, and my belief is that when MEI becomes available on the market, and I certainly hope it will be, full self-disclosure, I work for the company that is working it through the clinical trial process. When it becomes available, for all of those alcoholics who told me 1 drink is too many and 30 is too few, you could actually, as a physician or a counselor or nurse working with that person, you could say, well, how many do you want to drink? And if the answer was, let's say 4, you can give them the dosing of MEAI so that they have a more positive experience because it adds to the experience at first. And then they hit the wall. They hit the wall at 4 because that's how you dose them. So it's interesting because if you give somebody antabuse, which is a a prescription medication that, when combined with alcohol, makes you violently ill. If you give them antabuse, they will stop drinking, but they'll never do it again because it's such a horrible experience. MEAI is a pleasant experience. It's a positive experience. And it doesn't make you stop drinking because you're violently ill. It makes you stop drinking because you're just absolutely and completely done. So it's a unique tool that I believe will eventually work its way through the clinical trial pathway and will transform addictions treatment for some people. Now, what's different about MEI is it isn't used in the concept of therapy. It's most of the psychedelics are being legalized in the context of a specific therapy: LSD for depression, psilocybin for depression, MDMA for PTSD, the list goes on. But MEI won't be in the context of therapy. Hopefully, it will just be simply available on prescription that people can take in the right dosage to manage their addictions. Now, we have very good anecdotal evidence that it works for alcohol. We have some anecdotal evidence that it actually works for food, binge eating specifically. Yeah. And I personally believe, I have no evidence for this at all, but I personally believe that anything that you ingest that has an element of compulsivity to it, so crack cocaine, for example, I think would be helped, because it just introduces that element of you've done enough, you're finished. So, the evidence is not in, we have to do that work. But I think for things that are ingested that produce compulsivity, it'd be helpful for. I don't know about behavioral addictions. Does it work for one-armed bandits or shopping addiction or sex addiction? Any of those ones? I actually have no idea. I don't even have a hunch about those. But I think it will be, at one point in the future, a helpful tool with the consumptive type addictions where people have binge behaviors with. It would really change people's experience. Giving people control over what they consume, I think would change things.